HOA Karen was on his porch, soaked, screaming, and wearing nothing but a towel and a vendetta. Mascara running like war paint, fist pounding the door like it was a war crime scene. Isaac Monroe's peaceful plumbing job had just turned into a suburban fever dream. She howled like he'd personally rob her of hydration and human rights. Isaac had planned for everything except this, and as the doorbell cam recorded her meltdown, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about water. Isaac Monroe never thought plumbing repairs would end with a semi-nude neighbor pounding on his front door like it owed her child support. But here we are. It started with an email from Rick, his longtime plumber, about replacing corroded pipes beneath his house. Nothing dramatic, just 2 days of water shut-off while Rick's crew handled the job. Isaac, being a planner to a fault, arranged to stay at his cousin Tyrone's condo across town. He packed a bag, shut off the main valves, activated his Ring cameras, and even left a note for package delivery to avoid another passive-aggressive HOA citation. Everything was, in his words, idiot-proofed, which, in hindsight, underestimated just how resourceful idiocy can be, especially when it's wearing a towel, and a righteous sense of suburban entitlement. Maplewood Springs wasn't exactly paradise, but it was quiet and well manicured and just pretentious enough to keep property values inflated and egos inflated her. Isaac had lived there for nearly 4 years. As a senior systems engineer for a smart home company, he appreciated functional peace. What he didn't appreciate was Darlene Harper, or, as she liked to be called in every HOA newsletter and emergency squirrel sighting, board member at large. To Isaac, she was a HOA Karen, a pastel-clad tyrant with a clipboard and an unshakable belief that the American dream involved micromanaging trash can placement. They'd had run-ins, mostly small, a letter about inappropriate lawn ornamentation, a solar-powered garden gnome, a warning about overgrown hedges half an inch taller than regulation, and one unforgettable incident involving a Halloween fog machine and an alleged witchcraft disturbance. Isaac responded to each with the kind of calm professionalism that drove people like Darlene absolutely nuts. So when he left for Tyrone's place Tuesday morning, he assumed 2 days away would be peaceful. Tyrone had a rooftop hot tub and no HOA. What could go wrong? At approximately 9:47 p.m. that night, Isaac's phone buzzed. A motion alert from his doorbell cam. Curious, he tapped into the live feed, and there she was. Darlene Harper, hair dripping, mascara streaked, towel barely hanging on for dear life, banging on his front door like she was auditioning for a daytime soap meltdown. Isaac. Isaac! Open this door. I know you're in there. What did you do to the water? Tyrone, holding a bowl of popcorn, leaned over and squinted. Is that the HOA woman? She looking like she just got baptized in rage. Isaac blinked. Why is she on my porch at almost 10 o'clock? Dripping. Huh, maybe she thinks your door has a shower setting. On the screen, Darling screamed again, then pointed at the doorbell cam. You're going to pay for this. I'm reporting you. Isaac sat frozen for a moment. His water had been shut off that morning, inside his house only. The plumbers had confirmed it was isolated. So why was she acting like she was showering in his pipes? Something's off, he muttered. Understatement of the year, Tyrone replied, already grabbing his keys. We're going. If she rips your smart lock out the wall, I'm not letting you crash at mine again. The drive back took 13 minutes. Isaac monitored his camera the whole way. Darlene had not left. In fact, her performance had evolved into a one-woman protest, complete with accusations of hate crimes, threats of legal action, and some impressively creative cursing for someone who signs their HOA emails with warmest regards. As they pulled into the driveway, the scene looked exactly like the footage, except louder. Darlene spun around at the sound of the car doors, nearly losing her towel in the process. There you are, she shrieked. What did you do? Isaac stepped forward, keeping his voice calm. Darlene, why are you on my property, yelling about your water? She pointed dramatically. You shut off your water, and now I don't have any. And you did this to me. On purpose. And there it was, the sentence that changed everything. Inside the house, Darlene's shrieking still echoed faintly from outside as Isaac and Caleb stepped into the living room. The security monitor was already lighting up with alerts. Motion detected at the side gate, again at the backyard sensor, then another at the hose bib. Isaac tapped through the footage, rewinding the moment he left the house that morning. There, he said, pausing the feed. Caleb leaned in. Is that her trying to open your backyard gate? In a towel? Well, Isaac nodded slowly. Yep, right after the water stopped. She didn't just freak out. She went around back first. She tried to get in. They watched Darlene tug fruitlessly at the locked gate. She rattled it like a raccoon on Red Bull, cursed under her breath, and even looked around like she was checking if anyone was watching. And she stormed back to the front, wet hair flapping, towel twisted like a toga of entitlement. Sue, Caleb said, crossing his arms, explain to me how a grown woman ends up half-naked on your porch, accusing you of water terrorism. Isaac's fingers tapped the frame of the monitor. My water was shut off at the meter. Confirmed. No one else's should have been affected. It's not like this is some shared commune plumbing situation. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Unless. Exactly. Isaac stared at the paused image of Darlene mid-scream, mouth wide open like she was trying to swallow the whole charter whole. Unless her house is getting water from mine. You serious? Isaac rewound another camera angle. The one pointed toward the side yard where the water main access was. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. At 9:32 p.m., Darlene had tiptoed barefoot across the lawn, peered over the fence, and yanked hard on the gate handle. She even shook the padlock, like maybe it would fall off, out of respect for her authority. Okay, let me get this straight, Caleb said, rubbing his temples. You shut off your water. She loses hers. She panics, tries to get into your backyard, then has a breakdown on your porch and calls the cops to report you for harassing her? Pretty much. She's either the worst detective on earth or she already knew, Isaac finished. That's why she didn't ask if something was wrong with the water. She accused me immediately, like she knew she was dependent on my supply. There was a pause as the realization sunk in. Caleb exhaled, half laughing. Yo, that is next level audacity. She's been using your water? Secretly? For how long? I don't know, but we're going to find out. Isaac grabbed his phone and opened his water utility app. The usage graph spiked like a seismograph on caffeine. Even on days he wasn't home, gallons flowed like he was running a laundromat for a football team. This is last week. I was working late 3 nights, no one else home, yet somehow 80 gallons used? Caleb's mouth dropped. What was she doing? Bathing elephants? Isaac didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the numbers. Steady usage, strange timing, no logical explanation unless... Hold on, he muttered, pulling out an old email chain with his plumber. There it was. A quote from a year ago. Rick had mentioned a suspicious T-joint on the main line near the side wall. Thought it was from the previous homeowner, maybe a disconnected irrigation line. Isaac hadn't followed up. He figured it was nothing. Now it didn't feel like nothing. Now it felt like evidence. Outside, the shouting had stopped. Isaac clicked back to the porch cam. Darlene was gone. He switched to the side view. She was stomping back toward her house, towel now reinforced with a robe, muttering into her phone. You thinking what I'm thinking? Caleb asked, arms crossed. Isaac narrowed his eyes at the footage. Well, it wasn't water was shut off, so why was her house dry too, unless... Isaac had just finished pulling up the past 6 months of utility bills, each more insulting than the last, when the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't Darlene. It was 2 uniformed police officers standing stiffly on his porch like they'd just walked into an HOA-themed episode of Cops. Behind them, Darlene stood draped in her bathrobe like a suburban war general, arms folded, hair still damp, smug smile locked and loaded. Mr. Monroe? One officer asked, neutral but cautious. We received a report of harassment and utilities tampering. Isaac blinked. Utilities? Tampering? Darlene immediately jumped in. He cut off my water, officer, on purpose because I enforce the HOA rules. And because I'm a woman, and because I'm a senior, and, she took a dramatic pause, because I'm white. Isaac's eyebrows shot up. Are you serious? Dead serious, she snapped, looking like she expected the handcuffs to come out for him at any second. This is targeted discrimination, retaliation for me doing my job as a board member. I've already called my lawyer. Caleb, leaning against the stair rail, snorted. What lawyer takes bathrobe emergencies? Isaac stepped forward, phone already in hand, camera rolling. Officers, if I may, I'd like to present Exhibit A through Z. My security footage, utility notices, plumber's report, and roughly 180 days worth of inflated water bills. All pointing to one conclusion. Someone's been stealing my water, and the moment I shut it off, she ended up here in a towel screaming on my porch. Darlene gasped. I never admitted anything. Isaac tapped his screen. Actually, you kind of did. On camera, he swiped to the clip. Darlene, mere hours earlier, shrieking, You can't just shut off the water. It's always been this way, since before you moved in. The officers leaned in. The pause was thick enough to spread on toast. One officer looked at Darlene. Ma'am, is that accurate that you've had an arrangement for your water to come through his property? Darlene's face twitched like someone had just asked her to explain her tax returns under oath. Well, I mean, it was the previous owner. The HOA was aware. It's been maintained for continuity. It's part of the community spirit. Community spirit doesn't usually involve unmetered plumbing, the second officer muttered. If she thought calling the cops would intimidate me, Isaac said calmly, she forgot I record everything. The officer nodded slowly. We'll need to document this. Do you have copies of the plumbing reports? Right here. Isaac handed over the folder Rick had emailed him, including diagrams of the illegal T-joint, timestamps, photos. The officers flipped through the pages with increasing frowns. And here's a note from the utility company confirming her property has no active water account. Darlene's posture shifted from righteous to rattled. I didn't know that. That's a billing error. The HOA handled it. Do you have documentation of that? The officer asked. Well, no, but I'm on the board. I would know if it were unauthorized. That's not how utilities work, ma'am. Her face flushed red, but not from embarrassment, rage, entitlement, maybe a dash of realization that her plan was unraveling. Do you want to press charges? One officer asked Isaac. Not yet, Isaac replied, tone measured, but I'd like this on the record, and I'd appreciate it if Miss Harper would stay off my property unless invited, especially while soaking wet. You can't tell me what to do, Darlene barked, clutching her robe tighter. This is all retaliation because you don't like rules. You people always think you're above. Okay, the officer cut in quickly. Ma'am, we're gonna need to talk with you separately. As the police guided her back down the steps, Darlene hissed something under her breath that Isaac didn't catch, but the look in her eyes made it clear. This wasn't over. The taller officer glanced back at Isaac. We'll be forwarding this to our supervisor. It sounds like there may be larger issues involving property rights and utility fraud. Isaac gave a tight nod. Glad to hear it. I'll provide anything else you need. As the patrol car slowly pulled away, Darlene glaring daggers through the rear window, Caleb leaned over and whispered, Man, she really brought the police to her own crime scene? Isaac smirked. And the best part? They took notes. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that someone else in the neighborhood had watched the whole thing from behind their blinds, and the gossip chain of Maplewood Springs was just warming up. Isaac spent most of the next morning in a bureaucratic maze of hold music and call transfers. After bouncing between 3 departments and a very unhelpful chatbot named Cheryl, he finally reached someone at the water utility who could pull historical account data. Yes, sir, the rep said, voice crackling through the speaker. Your property at 112 Oak Run Lane has had active service for the past 42 months. Consistent usage, nothing abnormal until this recent shut-off for maintenance. Isaac leaned forward. What about the neighboring property, 114 Oak Run? More typing, a pause, then... That address has no active service account on file. None opened in the last 3 years. The last one closed shortly before your purchase date. Isaac stared at the screen, trying to absorb it. So they've been pulling water from somewhere for 3 years and no one noticed? Not unless there's an illegal hookup, the rep replied, too casually for what she'd just implied. Want me to log a formal investigation? Yes, absolutely. Isaac ended the call and immediately rang Rick the plumber. Tell me more about that suspicious T-joint near the foundation. Rick didn't hesitate. Oh, that? Yeah, I meant to flag it more seriously, but since it looked pro, I figured it was left over from a previous irrigation setup. But if your neighbor's water went out the second yours did, that's not coincidence. That's a parasitic line. Can you come back today? Already en route, Rick said. Didn't sit right with me anyway. An hour later, Isaac stood in his backyard while Rick and his assistant carefully dug around the main line. 5 inches beneath the soil, there it was, a professionally installed T-joint with a clean-cut pipe leading toward the fence line, straight into Darlene's property. Jesus, Rick muttered. This wasn't a DIY job. Whoever did this had tools, permits, or knew how to fake them. That's Peck's Piping new. I'd say 5, maybe 6 years old. Someone did this on purpose and wanted it to last. Isaac took photos from every angle. I'm going to need a report with photos, your signature, and a nice juicy phrase like unauthorized code-violating connection in bold. Rick gave a thumbs up. You got it, man. She's toast. Well, early afternoon, Isaac was scanning PDFs on his laptop and wondering how far this rabbit hole went when his doorbell rang again. This time, no police. No screeching road monster, just Harold Crenshaw, the HOA president, standing on the porch with the meek politeness of a man trying not to get sued. Mr. Monroe, he said, clasping his hands in front of his khaki shorts. I heard there was an incident last night. Thought I'd check in and maybe clear the air. Isaac didn't move from the doorway. You mean the part where your board member stole my water for 3 years, then called the cops on me when I noticed? Harold chuckled nervously. Now, let's not use loaded terms like stole. But like, these things are often misunderstandings, legacy arrangements, continuity agreements. Isaac narrowed his eyes. What kind of agreement involves illegally tapping into someone else's utility line? Harold coughed, shifting in his boat shoes. Look, before you moved in, the previous homeowner and Miss Harper had an understanding. We didn't think it was necessary to disturb it, given how long it had been in place. You didn't think it was necessary to mention it either. Harold's smile faltered. It's not in the HOA documents because technically it wasn't part of our infrastructure. More of a neighborly courtesy. Isaac stepped forward. Courtesy doesn't show up on my water bill. Theft does. Harold raised his hands. We're willing to work something out. A credit, maybe? A fee reduction? Not interested, Isaac said flatly. You all knew. And you let me pay for it. Harold's lips thinned. Mr. Monroe, let's not turn this into a community issue. Isaac didn't blink. Harold, it is a community issue because if it happened to me, who else got set up? Silence. And finally, a weak shrug. I'd have to check. Isaac didn't need to hear more. Please leave. And tell the rest of your board, lawyers talk to lawyers now. Harold gave a slow, defeated nod and walked off, his shoulders sagging like a man who just realized the neighborhood wasn't afraid of him anymore. Isaac closed the door, took a deep breath, and stared down at the photo of the T-joint on his phone. And just like that, he knew. This wasn't a one-time accident. This was systemic. Harold didn't wait long to try again. Less than 24 hours after their tense porch standoff, Isaac received a manila envelope slipped under his front door. No knock, no doorbell, just the HOA's passive-aggressive version of a ceasefire. Inside, a typed letter full of regret, miscommunication, and an offer that might have been generous if it hadn't been laughably insulting. A check for $1,500, 0 cents, an apology signed by the HOA treasurer, and stapled to the back, an NDA so tight it might as well have come with duct tape. No lawsuits, no public disclosure, no further discussion. Isaac stared at the papers like they were radioactive. Then he laughed, out loud, alone. Later that afternoon, Harold showed up again, this time unannounced and visibly sweating through his golf polo. Isaac, he said with the fakest of smiles, I trust you received our good faith gesture? You mean the hush money in the envelope? Harold's eyes twitched. Let's not characterize it that way. Oh? Then what do you call a non-disclosure clause tied to a check that doesn't even cover half my water bill over 3 years? An effort to resolve this amicably. Isaac held up the papers. You think $1,500, 0 cents, and a silence clause is going to undo 3 years of theft? You must really believe your own press releases. Harold shifted. We're trying to avoid community disruption? You should have thought about that before you let a board member use my water like it was a perk. Harold opened his mouth to argue, but Isaac wasn't done. He pulled out a neatly stapled packet. Every water bill, Rick's plumbing assessment, photos of the illegal T-joint, and the utility company's confirmation that Karen had no account. I already filed a complaint with the Utility Fraud Division. Next stop is City Code Enforcement. After that, my lawyer. If I go quiet, it'll be in a courtroom. Rick, you're making this adversarial, Harold snapped. Isaac leaned in. No, you made it adversarial when your board tried to scam me into paying for someone else's utilities, then doubled down when I found out. Now I'm just reading the receipts out loud. Harold left with the kind of speed only guilt can provide. Isaac watched him walk stiffly to his car, then headed inside and opened a fresh document folder titled HOA Corruption. It was time to start digging. Over the next few hours, he combed through every page of the HOA charter, financial statements from the past 2 years, thankfully public, and the bylaws posted on the community portal. And he started noticing things. Small discrepancies, strange line items labeled community discretionary expense, repeated payments to the same contractor for work that didn't visibly exist. Something stunk, and it wasn't just Darlene's backyard pipework. At 10:17 p.m., Isaac's phone buzzed. Unknown number, local area code. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Monroe? The voice was quiet, female. This is Linda Evans. I'm on the HOA Architectural Committee. We've only met once at a landscaping review. Isaac racked his brain. Middle-aged, glasses. Always looked like she had something she wasn't allowed to say. Right. Hi. I've seen what's happening, she said quickly, like she was afraid to be overheard. And I think you should know, this isn't just about the water. There's been financial irregularities for years. Hidden assessments, side deals. I have records, board minutes, emails. Isaac sat up straighter. Why are you telling me this? Because I kept quiet too long. And I thought they were just petty. But after what they did to you, it's bigger than that. Can I see them? She paused. Tomorrow night, after sunset. My place. Discreetly. Okay. Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. I have the documents you need. Linda's house was dimly lit, shades drawn, porch light off like she was preparing for a stakeout, not a handoff. Isaac slipped inside through the side door per her instructions, and she locked it behind him faster than a teenager hiding a party from their parents. Sorry for the secrecy, she whispered, guiding him to the kitchen table. But if the board knew I was talking to you, they'd ice me out immediately. Or worse, label me non-compliant. She opened a folder so thick it needed a rubber band to stay closed. These are internal emails, meeting notes, and receipts from the last 4 years. I've been keeping copies ever since I started seeing red flags. Isaac flipped through the stack, pages full of coded budgets, vague line items, and internal messages, with just enough arrogance to be admissible. You're telling me they used HOA funds to fix private patios and pay off personal contractors? Isaac asked. Linda nodded. Harold approved nearly $8,000, 0 cents, to replace windows on Patricia's house under community energy upgrades. There was no such program. And this one? Isaac held up a line reading water utility, offset, legacy homeowners only. That's the part that made me nauseous, Linda said. They created a backdoor category in the expense ledger. Technically, it doesn't show individual payouts. It gets lumped into shared infrastructure costs, which means residents like you've been paying for it the whole time. Isaac didn't speak for a full minute. Then quietly, how many are in on this? At least 5, she said. All original board members, all covering for each other. Isaac thanked her, took photos of every page, then promised her anonymity and left before 11 p.m. By midnight, all the documents were in his lawyer's inbox. The subject line read, "Time to drain the HOA swamp." Things escalated quickly after that. Within 3 days, city officials began calling. Then came a formal inquiry from the Utility Fraud Department. A week later, Isaac opened his door to find a local news van parked in front of his lawn. The reporter, a young woman with a determined look and wind-perfect hair, launched into her introduction before he could blink. Mr. Monroe, I'm Rachel from Channel 6. We're investigating reports of HOA misconduct and alleged a utility theft involving your property. Would you be willing to comment on camera? Isaac, holding a rake and wearing sweatpants, blinked twice. Now? Yes, she smiled, already flagging her cameraman. He sighed. Give me 3 minutes to put on a clean shirt. I don't do interviews looking like a suburban Bigfoot. The interview ran that evening under the title, Entitled or Illegal? Suburban HOA Under Fire for Secret Utility Perks. The segment featured Isaac explaining how his water had been siphoned off for 3 years. With overlays of Linda's documents, he kept her name out, and a pixelated photo of the T-joint pipe labeled Unauthorized Connection. What hit harder, though, was the aftermath. Neighbors began texting, emailing, knocking on his door. People he barely knew, now full of questions. Some thanked him for speaking up. Others admitted they'd noticed oddities, but never thought to question them. By Friday, the city announced an official audit of the HOA's finances. That night, as Isaac sat on his porch with Caleb, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up to its own dysfunction, his phone buzzed with an email from a city inspector who'd been reviewing the utility reports. The message was short, a single line with more impact than any invoice. Turns out, Karen wasn't just stealing your water. She'd been renting an illegal apartment with it. It started with a knock, sharp, deliberate, and way too official to be Amazon. Isaac looked out the window and saw what every entitled HOA tyrant dreads. 2 squad cars, 1 unmarked SUV, and a man in khakis with a clipboard. The city inspector. Detective Morales, calm and coiled, like someone who'd seen 100 HOA horror stories, nodded when Isaac stepped out. Mr. Monroe, we're executing a warrant today at Miss Harper's property. Illegal utility connection, possible code violations, and unpermitted rentals. You're welcome to observe as the victim. That last part landed with a satisfying thud. Neighbors were already couching outside. Barbara, watering her plants at dusk, Greg pretending to jog in jeans. Karen's house was silent at first. Then came the commotion. Officers rang, announced the warrant. No answer. Then a muffled yell. You can't do this. I have protection at City Hall. That was followed by a crash. Glass, maybe? The lead officer gave a glance, waited the required 30 seconds, then gave the nod. Ram. Door open. Entry cleared. Isaac stayed on the sidewalk as protocol required, but his phone was recording everything. Live stream? No, not yet. He wanted the full footage. Within minutes, a uniformed officer emerged from the house, holding up what looked like a DIY map of water lines drawn in crayon. You're not going to believe this, he told Morales. The basement's got a full legal apartment unit, bathroom, mini kitchen, space heater, completely hidden behind a false wall. Another officer added, every sink and tub in the house is filled with water. There's bottled gallons in closets under beds. It's like she thought we were coming to shut her off forever. Then came the grand finale. From the master bathroom, they pulled out Karen, wrapped in a damp robe, mascara streaked, clutching a tote bag full of granola bars, and what looked like a framed HOA award. You're violating my civil rights, she shrieked. This is political. This is a racial hit job. Isaac kept filming, expression steady, even as she spotted him across the yard and locked eyes like she was trying to curse him through sheer volume. You're the reason this neighborhood has fallen apart. We had standards before you moved in. The officers didn't even flinch. One read her the charges: utility theft, code violations, unlawful rental, obstruction. Another secured her wrists with handcuffs, gently but firmly. Karen's response? She threw her head back and screamed, I know people in plan and zoning. Caleb, who'd shown up just in time to witness the circus, leaned over and muttered, she really playing the City Hall Uno card right now. Isaac didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth curled. As the officers guided her across the lawn, Karen suddenly whipped around and yelled, He's filming me without my consent. That's harassment. Morales turned to Isaac. You're good, Mr. Monroe. Public sidewalk, and you're the complainant. She doesn't get to rewrite the rules now. Neighbors were no longer pretending. Some were filming too. Others just stared, mouths slightly open. Kids stopped riding bikes. Even old man Howie, who hadn't spoken to Isaac since moving, gave him a nod from his porch swing. When the patrol car door finally shut, sealing Karen's ranting inside, there was a strange moment of quiet, the kind that happens right before the neighborhood group chat explodes. Isaac finally lowered his phone, turning to Morales. "So, is that it?" The detective adjusted his sunglasses. "Not quite. We're opening a secondary investigation into the HOA. Ms. Harper named names when she realized the cuffs were real." Isaac blinked. "She flipped?" "She flipped hard, said the whole board knew about the water hookup, claimed she had emails, memos, even receipts. We're issuing subpoenas next." Caleb let out a low whistle. "Damn, first the water, now the board?" Isaac pocketed his phone. "You think that's the end?" "It wasn't. The HOA was next." It didn't take long after Karen's arrest for the whole rotten tree to come crashing down. Harold Crenshaw resigned within 48 hours, citing health reasons so vague it practically screamed caught red hand. 3 other board members, 2 retirees and 1 real estate agent who thought she was untouchable, were served civil complaints by the city for misappropriation of funds and failure to disclose conflicts of interest. The HOA's management company dropped them like hot potatoes and issued a public statement about rebuilding trust. Translation: "We didn't know, but now that you're mad, we suddenly care." Isaac never planned to get involved in neighborhood politics. He'd moved to Maplewood Springs for peace and quiet, not revolution. But when the interim board reached out with a request, joined the new committee, helped rebuild what was broken, he said yes, not because he needed the power, but because somebody had to make sure this never happened again. And who better than the guy who'd been unknowingly bankrolling HOA corruption through his plumbing? By mid-spring, flyers were up for a community BBQ, hosted not by the HOA, but by actual residents. Isaac and Caleb handled the grill, Linda manned the drinks table, and neighbors who barely nodded at each other 6 months ago were now swapping recipes and offering to dog sit. There was laughter, music, a slip slide for the kids, and somewhere in the background, Karen's old house, now owned by a young couple with a rescue lab and a front yard tomato garden, stood with its newly painted blue door, shining bright in the sun. The beige compliance Karen once demanded was gone, literally painted over. "She moved to Florida," Linda said between sips of lemonade, "with her daughter, supposedly doing her community service at a municipal pool." Caleb grinned. "Bet she's still screaming at lifeguards about water allocation." Isaac chuckled, then turned serious. "You ever think we'd get here?" Linda shook her head. "Not in a million years. But I'm glad we did." The months that followed brought real change. The bylaws were rewritten with community oversight. Transparency became standard. Everyone paid fairly, equally. Projects were voted on, not handed down from some khaki throne. The phrase legacy arrangement was now a neighborhood joke. If someone mentioned it, it was usually followed by laughter and a beer. One evening, as the sun dipped low and people began packing up folding chairs and leftover potato salad, Isaac stood in his yard and looked around. Kids playing tag, neighbors chatting without tension, an actual sense of belonging humming beneath it all. Barbara approached with a paper plate of cookies. "You know," she said, "I used to think you were a little standoffish." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "I was just trying not to get fined for breathing wrong," she laughed. "Well, I'm glad you made noise when it counted." Later that night, after Caleb had left and the neighborhood quieted down again, Isaac sat on his porch, the warm glow of porch lights flickering across driveways. His phone buzzed. An article from the local paper, Maplewood Springs, the neighborhood that fought back, with a photo of Isaac shaking hands with a city inspector, barbecue smoke in the background. He didn't repost it. Didn't need the likes, but he saved the screenshot anyway. Out of habit, he glanced across the street at Karen's old house. The tomato plants were thriving. The new owners had strung up fairy lights and painted the mailbox with little bees. It didn't look entitled by entitlement anymore. It looked like a home. The whole thing had started with a bad water hookup and an entitled woman in a towel, but what it became, what it sparked, was something far bigger than revenge. It was restoration. Reclamation, a quiet kind of justice that reshaped everything it touched. She stole my water. But in doing so, she gave this community its soul back. Here's the real takeaway. Sometimes justice doesn't come wrapped in a cape. It comes with receipts, camera footage, and a guy who's just tired of paying someone else's water bill. This story wasn't just about plumbing or HOA drama. It was about standing your ground when everyone expects you to stay quiet. It's a reminder that silence is expensive, but truth, that stuff pays dividends. Whether you're dealing with shady neighbors or broken systems, speak up, ask questions, call it out, because change starts the moment you decide you're not here to be stepped on. Thanks for riding this roller coaster with me. If this wild suburban saga had hit you in the fields or made you laugh, rage, or fist pump a little, drop a comment below. What's the craziest HOA thing you've seen? Don't forget to like, share, and hit that subscribe button for more stories where the little guy fights back and wins.